During the 16-bit generation, Sega was an absolute juggernaut in the field of sports video games. They started early by taking the Japanese-released Mega Drive sports software, adding high-profile coaches and players, and advertising the hell out of it. Then they put together teams to churn out Western-made series that would be updated yearly. These games matured into solid, awesome releases across just about every sport you can think of. These games helped keep the Sega name in the hearts and minds of every red-blooded sports gamer across the globe. When talk of the Sega Saturn began to become a reality, it was a foregone conclusion that Sega would double down on sports games again to make sure they didn't lose the edge they had fought so hard to establish. When the Saturn launched in North America, it had a soccer and golf game, a fair start that would need to be quickly backed up to avoid the loss of momentum. Towards the end of 1995, they got out NHL All-Star Hockey and World Series Baseball, but there were two glaring omissions: an NFL football game and an NBA basketball game. These two essential leagues were staples in North American culture and an important part of the fans' diet who were also gamers. Sega would eventually get an NBA action released in June of 1996, over a year after the Saturn's launch. To my utter shock and horror, a Sega Sports NFL title would not see the light of day until November of 1996, a year and a half after the Saturn first showed up. Despite its tardiness, I was still glad to see it. After all, I had loved the Joe Montana titles on the Genesis, so there was no way in hell I was going to miss this one. In this episode, we will review Sega Sports NFL 97 for your Sega Saturn. Firing up NFL 97, you are greeted to multiple options and game modes. Here you can choose an exhibition, which is a single regulation game with no season or postseason consequences. Practice, as you can imagine, is a way to run test plays and get a feel for your team. The stats option is essentially a team viewer. You can see the depth chart, the playbook, and the schedule for the season. The season mode is an entire 16-game season where you can play for a winning record to make it to the postseason and ultimately the Super Bowl. Should you not want that full season, you can play an abbreviated version of just 4 or 8 games or go straight to the playoffs. The Play Editor is a fully functional creator where you can design your own plays. Once you choose your mode, you also get an options menu where you can adjust the length of quarters, the difficulty, the speed of the gameplay, the likelihood of a fumble, the field type, the stadium type, the weather, so on and so forth. Deeper into the options menu, you can also find a button configuration, a playbook creator, a team creator, and a selection of penalties you can turn on and off. Once you're in the game, you know this set up well because everything had been using it for years. By hitting A, B, or C on the gamepad, you choose your formation, choose the play associated, and then work your magic. The playbooks are stacked with various plays you'd expect of the teams you choose. This is, of course, expanded further by your ability to edit the playbooks and the plays within them. Those of you that enjoy the sport on the deepest of levels could spend hours alone here before you ever even hike your first ball. Once you take control of the quarterback and choose the pass, you'll have your receivers tied to your X, Y, and Z buttons. You can also pump fake with B or throw the ball away with your L and R triggers. Once the ball is thrown to the receiver, you can hit B to catch or Y to jump to catch above a defender. Running plays also give you some moves to consider. B is your spin move, A is your speed burst, Y is your hurdle, and C button dives for a few extra yards. On the defense, you likewise have some moves. The B button always chooses the defender closest to the ball. A is your speed burst, Y is your jump to swat or deflect the ball in the air, C is your dive tackle. Your L and R triggers jump to the nearest unimpeded or blocked defender. There is also a fully featured replay system in place. You can zoom, tilt, fast forward, rewind, or adjust the action frame by frame. Additional options include audibles you can set, different camera views to choose from, and of course timeouts if you need them. For those of you curious, this supports as many as 8 players if you have the 6-player adapters to pull it off. Finally, it is fully licensed by both the NFL and the Players Association.
Touchdown!
Early 32-bit sports games used two-dimensional sprites for players, and then polygons for the field and stadium. This setup should have favored the Saturn's architecture, and NFL 97 should have been a graphical showpiece for the device. One look at World Series baseball is all you need to see to know the possibilities here. Except NFL 97 shits the bed right from the get-go. The problems with the title's graphical presentation are numerous and debilitating. The player sprites have this horrendous squat look about them that looks just ridiculous. It's like their upper bodies are huge and their legs are short. Not even some decent animation makes this palatable because the entire package has massive chasms between good and bad. Watching players run down the field is almost humorous if it weren't attached to a product you actually spent $50 on. The stadium also has a really distracting draw distance to the details on the field. They appear as broken lines until you get close to them and they draw in fully, creating an almost grainy look to everything more than 10 yards away. I might could have looked past all of that if the game ran at a really high, very solid frame rate. It doesn't. Not only is the game slow as molasses on the regular speed setting, but the passing game is riddled with frame drops that cripple the flow of the action. It's even worse than it sounds because it's like the entire game speeds up and slows down unnaturally for nearly every single task. Changing the camera angles will get you some extra speed, but that comes with the caveat of a ridiculous perspective that never really focuses on the ball, leaving you utterly guessing where the action will end up. The stadium is also pixelated and blocky, nothing new for this era, but more pronounced than it should be in this game. The final nail in this disappointing showing is the awful mesh transparencies that appear in the passing arc that shows the path of the ball, and the action icons which highlights which player you are controlling and which player you can pass to. It creates a final picture that is overall ugly, unimpressive, and well below what this hardware could have produced. I know this because Madden 97, which released before NFL 97, is light years beyond it in every way visually. Sega didn't just drop the ball here, they handed it straight to the competition and walked off the field. There's not a lot to hate on nor a lot to praise about the sound. The crowd does sound decent and the announcer sounds like what you'd hear at an actual game. Unfortunately, there's no great music to celebrate a touchdown or big play, which is disappointing, but compared to the visuals, it's a win I'll take, as pathetic as that may be. It's clear that the designers of NFL 97 meant for the play creator and the playbook designer to be front and center addition that would help sell the product. At the time, it was truly innovative to be sure, an option so deep that Madden himself would have likely approved. The problem is the gameplay around this feature is absolute garbage. The game followed up an excellent 16-bit Joe Montana series that had matured into one of the best representations of the sport. NFL 97 was a monumental fall from grace, and one Sega couldn't have done any worse. The gameplay is slow and prodding. You can increase the game speed in the options, which doesn't fully fix the issue. So much so, every scrap of gameplay you have seen in this video is at top speed, Again, a sad reality. The passing game is also fundamentally unfit to be any fun at all. You can turn off the ridiculously ugly and unfunctional passing arc to help, but it still feels incredibly clunky and far too easy to miss a wide open reception. The running game is easier to exploit, and once you find the best plays, risking a pass just isn't worth it. The gameplay just never obtains any real rhythm or fun here, at least not one that makes you want to come back for more. Even when you do adjust to get good enough to handle the CPU and win, there's hardly any motivation to keep playing. The season feels soulless and emotionally empty. It's like watching a homemade video of a high school football game between two really bad teams. Add to that the funky visuals that fail to impress on any level at all, and NFL 97 is a complete disaster. Sega was late to the party with one of the most popular sporting leagues in North America, and then released a product that was deeply inferior to the games released on its 8-year-old 16-bit machine. To make matters worse, Sony actually had the wherewithal to understand the importance of a 32-bit NFL product in 1995, and released the excellent NFL Game Day, which absolutely shits all over this mess, pisses on its dead carcass, and then screws its wife. This wasn't a simple fall from grace that Sega couldn't have seen coming. It was a point-blank result of incompetence, failure to read and understand your market, all while pumping money and manpower into a competing product your own company designed and released. A Sega Sports NFL title should have been put into development early, backed up by an impressive budget, and given all the assets it needed to continue to make the Sega name a force to be reckoned with in sports gaming. Instead, NFL 97 was a season-ending injury that completely took Sega out of competition that entire generation. That's right, my friends, this was the only Sega Sports NFL game on the Saturn for its entire run. Some of you may be wondering why I chose to review this game. I mainly wanted to impress upon you that this was indicative of everything that was wrong with the Saturn. It was a game in an area that Sega had done incredibly well in with the Genesis, and just like that, the market turned on a dime and left Sega behind for not keeping up with it. Sega Sports had been a 16-bit stronghold for Sega in North America, and losing that label was no small thing. I also wasn't the only one that hated this game at its release. It was almost universally despised by the gaming media of the day. GamePro crushed it under a scathing review that hammered it with a low score across the board. Game Informer also gave it a low score, basically saying what I was ranting about here. Sega had been great on the Genesis and failed miserably with this. The magazine Intelligent Gamer said it was no fun to play and made it clear a play editor did not make up for its terrible gameplay. Next Generation Magazine didn't hold back, giving it its lowest rating possible and calling it one of the worst football games in years. The story behind the game gets a bit more interesting than the game itself. Apparently, Sega had been desperately searching for an NFL product for the Saturn after failing to complete one with any of their usual partners. They finally settled on buying the rights to Jimmy Johnson's Football from GameTech, a previously announced Saturn game. Sega had GameTech take the game, reskin it, and release it as Sega Sports NFL 97, the very game you see here. GameTech would then take the same game, partner with Interplay, improve it slightly, and release it a year later on the PlayStation as Jimmy Johnson's VR Football. Make no mistake, it was a terrible game there as well. At the end of the day, NFL 97 was a truly back-breaking release for Sega in North America. They had great success in the 16-bit market with their lineup of sports offerings, and their NFL products commanded the attention and respect of consumers and the gaming media alike. In one fell swoop, this was undermined by this release, and never corrected. Some will tell you that it shouldn't have mattered any because Sega also had Madden 97 and 98. But here's the thing, so did the PlayStation. What made Sega Sports special is that not only were most of the games great, but you could only play them on Sega's consoles. For Sega to be so ill-prepared for that to continue on the Saturn is depressing, and a blueprint for how to give a market away. So embarrassing had all this become, Sega actually didn't release NFL 98 on the Saturn at all, and instead did it for the Sega Genesis, which was among the final releases for that device. NFL 97 was a reminder of not just how far Sega had fallen during this generation, but also just how spectacular its competition had been in its execution. Brighter days would come with the NFL 2K series, but I can't help but feel there was a mortal wound struck here that the company never really recovered from. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.